this morning. I'm sorry, not Cleveland's, Ohio's abortion clinics, with the assistance of the ACLU, filed suit against our Attorney General, David Yost, the Director of the Ohio Department of Health, the Ohio Medical Board, and the prosecutors in the counties in which these abortion providers and abortion clinics are located. They filed a substantive due process 14th Amendment challenge. So that's a challenge based on a woman's right to privacy, bodily autonomy, and is the right that we recognized in Roe versus Wade. So it's a relatively simple and straightforward complaint, but I did want to just briefly highlight, because what we're kind of starting with is, I'm calling it the update on the continued assault on abortion rights, is that the bill will outlaw 90% of abortions. If you can scroll down, Joan, 90% of the abortions in Ohio, because 90% of the abortions that occur currently after 6 weeks of pregnancy, we're all women here. And so I think we all know what 6 weeks means. That means one missed period and 2 weeks. So that's what it really is. It's 2 weeks after your first missed period to be able to find an abortion clinic, get to the abortion clinic, have the 24-hour waiting period, and have the abortion. Approximately 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the age of 45. So we're talking about outlining a safe medical procedure that women in America use, and not infrequently. A majority of women, 61%, who have an abortion already have one child. And most women who have an abortion, 66%, also either plan to have another child or to have a child. What concerns me a little bit is that the judge hearing this case is a George W. Bush appointee. He went on senior status in February, so he doesn't have a full docket, and his name is Judge Michael Ryan Barrett. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the trial court. The trial court, has an obligation to hold to precedent and hold to not only Roe v. Wade, but Casey v. Planned Parenthood, which is a 1992 decision. So the court, especially if he's judicially conservative like he should be, should overturn the law, the 6-week abortion ban. But it'll be interesting to see if that happens or not. So I'm going to keep an eye out on that case. But that is not the end of the abortion legislation in Ohio. The onslaught continues from the 133rd General Assembly. Just this last week, it was reported by State House News, which is basically the NPR for Ohio, or the affiliate, that there is a new bill that will be introduced. It has not yet, but it is going to be introduced in the State House, and it would require every single abortion provider to inform patients that receive medical abortions, and that's the abortion pill. It used to be called RU486, and now it's called mifepristone. That the procedure is actually reversible. So right now, if a woman seeks a medical abortion, it's a 2-drug protocol. You take one, then you wait and you take another pill. And so what this bill would require every single abortion provider to say is that you can take the first pill, and then instead of taking the second pill, you can take a dose of progesterone, which would stop your abortion from happening. However, the pseudoscience is not recognized by the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, so that it's not, and that this reversal protocol for a medical abortion is not scientifically sound. And the lawmakers announced that the bill is being finalized and is almost ready for introduction. So I will keep an eye on that bill. I don't have a number yet, and I don't even have, based on the reporting, whether it's going to be introduced in the Senate or the House.
And doctors have already been saying that they would consider this to be unsafe.
Yeah, it's pretty unconscionable that this government would be requiring doctors to provide inaccurate and medically unverified information. And then HB 182 is another anti-abortion measure that is even more extreme than the six-week abortion ban, and what's being called the most restrictive abortion bill to date. And what that will do is prohibit insurance companies from offering insurance for abortion services. There's something called the Hyde Amendment that already exists, so that no public dollars, Medicaid or Medicare dollars, can be used to fund abortion services. So Planned Parenthood, does not receive any federal dollars for the abortion services it provides, and has not for decades. That being said, private insurance companies can offer that kind of coverage. What is terrifying about this bill, not only does it contradict Obamacare, and I'm unclear as to whether Obamacare would control, is that it actually would prevent insurers from protecting contraceptives, because what the bill does is define a non-therapeutic abortion to include drugs or devices used to prevent the implantation of a fertilized ovum. And that is exactly how the IUD works. So the IUD, which is again becoming, I think, one of the most popular forms of birth control, is prevents the implantation of a fertilized egg, or can. It works at kind of both ways, but it can do that. And so and there are also birth control pills and other methods of hormonal birth control that prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg. So it would prevent insurance companies from offering the copper IUD, the morning after pill, that's Plan B, and Ella. So it's both of those. And it would specifically delete such language that is in the statute right now that said that those were specifically excluded. So right now in the state of Ohio, an abortion I don't believe insurance companies can provide coverage for abortion. I believe what it does is this bill specifically amends that and expands the definition for non-therapeutic abortions to include basically contraceptives. And the only exceptions in this bill, which is what we're seeing in a new round and wave of all these anti-abortion measures, is that there is no rape or incest exception. Right. The only exception is to save the life of the woman. And controversially, there's also only an exception for ectopic pregnancies if the doctor attempts to keep the ectopic pregnancy viable and re-implant it in the uterus, which is pure science fiction. Just absolute science fiction, does not exist. Exactly, yeah. It can't be done. It's never been done, and yet it would be a requirement of this bill. So this bill was introduced by, I believe, by Representative Becker. Yes. And he gave, you'll see this language. He gave a quote to State House News where he's insisting that the bill doesn't target birth control. And what he said was, when you get into the contraception and abortifacients is really just a code word for contraceptives. That's clearly not my area of expertise, but I suppose if it were true that what we typically known as the pill would be classified as abortifacient, then I would imagine the drug manufacturers would reformulate it so it's no longer an abortifacient and is strictly a contraceptive, Becker says. So I pulled out this language because these legislators are not stupid. They know exactly what they're doing, and this is nothing but an assault on women's rights to contraceptives. And it's a right that dates all the way back to the 50s and to Griswold versus Connecticut, which was established our right to privacy, and specifically provided that a woman had a right to utilize contraceptives and engage in family planning practices with the aid of medical providers. And this is an alarming trend, and it goes hand in hand with what we talked about last time, which is these anti-abortion activists pursuing criminal charges against women. So I think we're going to see a continued assault on both contraceptives and a newfound sense of urgency to punish women with criminal charges, which has not been the goal of the radical anti-abortionists lately. Mm-hmm. And then just quickly, I think we've talked about SB 27, Senate Bill 27, and House Bill 90, but there's been a little bit of updates. So Senate Bill 27, as you may remember, would require abortion providers to either cremate or bury, embalm an aborted fetus. And the bill passed out of the Senate committee on March 26th and the full Senate on March 27th. And now it's moved over into the House. So the House on April 30th had its second hearing on the bill, and only a couple of right to life organizations testified in favor of the bill. And right now, nothing further scheduled as of this week. So it's been a couple weeks, which it'll be interesting to see how much longer it takes for another hearing to be held.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll keep my eyes on that because it's a pretty extreme bill, and it imposes an undue burden on women who have to choose what they want to do with their remains, and it imposes an undue burden on abortion facilities who can't treat the byproduct as medical waste. And if you remember, hospitals are still allowed to treat it as medical waste. It's only abortion providers who can't. So it's disturbing. And HB 90 is a bill that would require the educational institutions in Ohio to spread information on the sanctity of life, and it would absolutely require that this education be implemented. So there's been there's been another hearing on the bill on April 30th. The bill had its fourth hearing.
It's okay.
So I'm sorry, I think there's a little bit of a typo at the end. I must have not finished my thought. So it had its fourth hearing in the House. I expected, given the number of hearings it's had, that it will likely pass the House on partisan lines, and at that point it'll make its way over to the Senate, but there hasn't been at least anything in the last couple weeks. But in the last hearing on HB 90, I just wanted to point this out. So Reverend Terry Williams, who is the lead pastor of the Orchard Hill United Church of Christ, provided some pretty compelling testimony to the committee. And I just think it's nice to frame what I've just talked about, because I think it's really important to frame it on moral grounds, and that this is such a moral issue. And the anti-abortionists like to think that they have the moral authority, and they don't. And what he says is that abortion healthcare services are moral, ethical, and righteous options for people of faith and conscience to exercise in our state. Moralizing language and efforts to educate by the, help me with that word? Synodo. That is the provision of only portions of the whole truth instead of the whole truth itself, are an affront to the people of the state of Ohio, and represent an abusive state-led attempt to persecute people who hold sincere religious beliefs that support abortion healthcare services as moral and just ways of protecting their health and living abundantly. And I think that, in essence, summarizes how I feel about the issue and why this assault, I think, touches. It enrages me, and it makes me want to fight.
I should also note that some of these trends, these national trends particularly, are alarming a number of the clergy in UU circles right now. And many of us are old enough to remember the organizations and networks of support in the 60s and early 70s that would help women who had to go to other states to receive their reproductive health services. And we're talking, frankly, about revival of some of those networks at this point.
The things that they're saying are totally unethical as well, you know.
Yes. That's right. You're right.
Yeah. The pseudoscience is unethical, and it's not in line with, medical practices or standards, and it is disturbing. The lack of a universal truth in our society right now, I also find disturbing.
I feel that they have crossed way over the line of what they don't have the right to do. They have no right to make these demands on women or anybody else. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so upset right now.
I know. It's really depressing. So I'm going to give you a breather, and we're going to talk about some good news. So I am happy to say that Senate Bill 3, which is comprehensive criminal justice reform, at least as it relates to sentencing guidelines and sentencing for drug offenses, is making its way slowly through the Senate. So the third hearing on the bill took place just this morning on May 15th after more than a month of no hearings. So the last time that SB 3 had any hearings was in March. So I took a quick look at the testimony that occurred this morning, and it's interesting to note the proponents that were there. So the proponents include Koch Industries, so that would be the Koch brothers, the Office of the Public Defender, Policy Matters Ohio, and the ACLU. I have some concerns about the Koch brothers' interests in this bill, as I think it's I think based on what I've read, I think it's an attempt to make money off the backs of people that have a medical problem, and to monetize addiction services and privatize some of our criminal justice system. So I really do think that's the Koch brothers' interest in this. At the same time, I think that this bill has a lot of potential to really do some good in the state. And it's interesting to note that the ACLU is advocating for 6 amendments to the bill. So what they want to do, so what this bill would do is to take felony drug possession and use charges and move them down to misdemeanor charges, and it's an unclassified misdemeanor, but it does not apply retroactively. So the 2,000, I think it's over 2,000 inmates currently incarcerated in Ohio on these types of charges, which is enough to fill 2 prisons, would not receive any relief under this bill. What the ACLU wants to do is make the bill retroactive, so we provide relief not only to those who could be arrested in the future, but those who are currently sitting arrested or incarcerated on a felony charge when all they did was use a drug and have a diagnosable medical addiction. They also want to include more robust data collection and reporting, such that we can determine if this bill is actually effective. I was at an event today where Justice Melody Stewart spoke, and she was speaking rather eloquently about this issue. So she said she was rather shocked when she got to the Ohio Supreme Court about how little data collection there is, and how little the court knows about whether what it does is actually effective. There are so many organizations in the United States that keep data, and statistical data, such that we can determine what works and what doesn't, and we just don't in this area. I think it's probably part and parcel of the systemic racism that underpins our justice system and sexism, but we don't, and we should. They also want to include a definition in the bill that would ensure that what the bill will do is it ensures that people who have technical violations of their probation, so people, let's say someone is required to drug test and they have been clean for 60 days, but they backslide and use, under current law right now, that person could then be thrown back into jail. Under this new bill, those technical violations would not be considered a violation of probation, and therefore they would continue to be on probation, but have to meet metrics, go to rehab, engage in a process. But there's no definition of what a technical violation is. So that's the intent, but it's not fleshed out. So the ACLU would like that. The ACLU wants a corresponding increase in state funding for substance abuse treatment, because the Senate Bill 3 says all of these offenders, people who have drug addictions, should be sent to rehab facilities, engage in treatment, but there's not a corresponding appropriation to increase the money for treatment. And so they also want to strike portions of the bill that make people who have had minor or have had misdemeanor marijuana possession offenses on their records from being eligible for a stay in lieu of conviction for treatment, because what this bill also does is it allows people to not be convicted of crimes and instead receive treatment. But if you've been convicted of marijuana possession, it doesn't apply to you. And then the ACLU wants to make the stay for treatment in lieu of conviction, so that people who are using drugs get the treatment they need and not incarcerated, to be mandatory instead of in the judge's discretion. So those are the amendments that the ACLU would like to see happen to the bill. I think it would strengthen this bill a great deal and provide some much needed relief. And I'm really happy to say that it had a hearing this morning, so I'm optimistic that we may get some more momentum on this bill. And even if I'm personally skeptical of the Koch brothers, the fact it has bipartisan support from proponents, and it crosses ideological lines, is a shining light that maybe this bill will actually pass.
It brings in some of the better elements of issue 1, but not all of the good elements that were in issue 1. But it does prevent, it's kind of like issue 1 light.
Yes, I think that's very accurate.
Issue 1 light. So it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I think all of the energy that people brought to the issue 1 debate at this last election has finally influenced some people to get on board with this bill.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to continue to watch Senate Bill 18, which would outlaw the shackling and solitary confinement of pregnant inmates during their 3rd trimester, and would also prevent shackling during childbirth. No hearings have occurred since we last talked about it, but I'm going to continue to watch it. I think it would be a humane law to pass. The next one is Senate Bill 54, and it's also introduced in the House, HB 136, and this would prohibit the death penalty if the offender had a serious mental illness at the time the aggravated murder occurred. The House had the first hearing on April 11th, and the Senate had its first hearing on April 24th, and so April 24th was since we last spoke or last met. So, you know, it's introduced in both chambers. They're aligned on, at least on one, seeming to want to pass it. It's got some bipartisan support, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see momentum on it. And then SB 99 and SB 100 have not had any hearings. They haven't even had a first hearing, and that would provide some relief to the children in our state, and it would eliminate mandatory bindovers from juvenile court to adult court and give judges discretion in making those determinations, and also ensure that parole was mandatory if a juvenile was sentenced for a term indefinitely or for life in prison, which, you know, I think every human is redeemable, but especially juvenile offenders, you know, they deserve a second chance in life, and locking them up for life does not seem like a smart decision.
No.
A little news came out from the Ohio Supreme Court's bail task force. I can't spell again. I'm sorry, people. And a local outlet, so again, that's the State House News Bureau, has reported that there will be at least 9 recommendations to discuss, and will be announced, I believe, out of the task force. So the mayor of Sydney, Michael Barhost, and who's also the president of the Municipal League, spoke with the State House News Bureau and said, you know, we're considering some good proposals, and their next meeting on May 23rd. So I'm really, it's positive to see that they're continuing to meet, that they continue to have ideas. This is the task force that the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court convened to at least help with the issue of predatory bail bondsmen and the predatory bail system we have that really produces unequal and unfair results. You know, everyone is presumed innocent until they're proven guilty, except for the people that are sitting in jail for 12 months awaiting trial. The last quick note I wanted to add is that a quick update. Governor DeWine, and as you may remember, halted death penalties pending a new drug protocol after Magistrate Judge Michael Mers in the Southern District of Ohio said that it amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. And so all of them are on a halt, but despite that fact, the Ohio Supreme Court has set yet another execution date. This is for Scott A. Group, who was convicted of killing someone in a bar and stealing from that person in 1996 in the Youngstown area. And so his execution is now scheduled for January 10th, 2024.
And there was a report today that DeWine was saying that he was confident that there would soon be a new and approved drug protocol.
Correct. The Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation has been working on it, and I would anticipate to see more on that. Joan, do you want to speak on SB 33?
Sure. Senate Bill 33, we have a quote here by me up at the front, but it's an anti-protest legislation limiting the rights of Ohioans to basically peacefully assemble and protest at what are called critical infrastructure sites. Now, the list of critical infrastructure sites is huge, and it includes everything, mostly pipelines, oil sites, fracking sites, anything having to do with oil and gas delivery, but it also includes railroads and ICE offices and a number of other interesting things. It's just a huge long list, but it's mostly having to do with the oil and gas industry. And it is similar to other bills that have been put into other states. And one that is very similar is the one in West Virginia, where people are now being arrested for peaceful, nonviolent protest at a pipeline and then charged with a felony, not a misdemeanor, but a felony. Not only that, but any complicit organization, such as a church, the Sierra Club, the UUA for that matter, any organization that is supporting these protesters can also be slapped with the felony charge, any complicit organizations, and be fined up to 10 times higher than what the felony fine would be. So a member of a congregation, the congregation has supported a pipeline protest at, let's say, something like Standing Rock, and the person is caught being peaceful, but charged with felony, fined $10,000. The congregation could then be fined $100,000. So this is obviously a way of trying to keep organizations and individuals from doing any kind of organized protest around oil and gas and other infrastructure sites. And at this point, the bill is out of the Senate. It passed. There were several of us that were doing written and in-person testimony, and they limited that, by the way. But we did go and provide testimony, and it was voted out of committee and then voted out of Senate the very same day. And now it is in the House, in the Public Utilities Committee, and they have not yet scheduled hearings, but you better believe that there will be a lot of us going there and speaking about it.
And I want to add just two more details, Joan. That roundup was better than I could have done it, but it applies to critical infrastructure, even if that critical infrastructure is buried and you're not aware that it's there. True. And it applies on private land. So if you live somewhere in Ohio and there's a natural gas easement that runs through your backyard, and you want to invite people onto your land to peacefully protest, those people could be arrested for engaging in that activity, and it is again a felony. Right. So it restricts the rights of free association. It restricts the rights of free speech, and it's just generally a horrible bill.
And it restricts the rights of freedom of religion, for heaven's sakes, because the complicit organization part of this is particularly chilling and does have an effect on religious organizations, everything from the Mennonites to the UUA, who feel that it is part of their religious duty to protest these things that are destroying the health and well-being of people. Yes. So, not only that one, but I'm going to also add very quickly that we're also dealing with House Bill 6. House Bill 6 is a bill that is now being heard, and it is going to take away the savings that were offered to people for doing home efficiency work, on energy. And it will also take away some of the other rebates on efficiency work. And it will take away the set-asides for clean energy development, renewable energy development, and then give nice, large, lovely subsidies to the 2 failing nuclear power plants in Ohio, which are being classified as clean energy. So House Bill 6 is now the Clean Energy Bill. And it is sitting in, let me see if I can recall which committee it's in right now.
It was in the subcommittee on energy, and it's been voted out of the subcommittee and back to the main committee. And I don't remember the name of that committee, Joan.
Yes, and I've got that here, but once again, it's pretty amazing that that it would be there. Oh, here we go. House Bill 6 is in Energy and Natural Resources, And today they had a hearing for the proponents, for the people that are for the bill to speak to it. And during the proponent hearing, the Republican chair was not recognizing the Democratic members' questions. And so the Democrats all got up and walked out. Then it took another hour for them to come back into the hearing. But it's already seen that this is a real controversial bill.
Yeah, it's really seen as a, oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask a quick question.
Yes.
As far as the Public Utilities Commission is concerned, does that include water?
For critical infrastructure?
Oh, and critical infrastructure, yes. Water facilities are part of this. So the people that were protesting at Flint, Michigan,
yes,
would have been accused of a felony, yes.
Wow. And even when the water is taking the skin off your bones, and okay, that's just terrible. Okay, thank you.
It's included. I read the whole list. I do not remember the whole list, nor do I really want to, but it was definitely included in there.
Oh,
yeah, it's broad.
Telephone poles are included.
Wow.
Cell phone towers, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
All right.
One more thing, just real quick on HB6 is that it's being called, it's really a bailout of First Energy. So First Energy Solutions, which is like a subsidiary of First Energy, is currently in bankruptcy, and the First Energy has put a lot of pressure on the state of Ohio to ensure that its nuclear power plants are profitable, because right now they are not profitable. So they've threatened to shut them down and exerted a lot of pressure to obtain these subsidies. And so really this idea that it's the Ohio Clean Energy Program is nothing more than branding, and is really just a bailout of First Energy, and it's crony capitalism.
And First Energy is rather notorious for donating to any number of different people who are up for election on a regular basis.
So then the last thing we're going to talk about is another recent court case that affects all of us in Ohio in a very meaningful way. As I think some of us may remember, back in 2011, the congressional districts in Ohio for the federal elections were redrawn. That's at the time when those of us in Cleveland on the west side lost an Kucinich as a representative, and now my district runs from Cleveland. I live in Lakewood all the way to Toledo. It also affected Marsha Fudge's district, and basically meant that she now has to drive down to Summit County, and it has part of Akron in her constituency, even though she has never lived in Akron and had no connection to that city. So when the 2011 map was drawn after the 2010 census, the process by which it was drawn was extreme, to say the least. The Republicans, in concert with Boehner, who was then the Speaker of the House, got together, got a hotel room at the DoubleTree in downtown Columbus for 3 months, took out the beds from that room, installed desks, and two or three paid consultants who had been working as staffers for the Republicans, holed up in the room for 3 months with sophisticated software drawing the map. And what the testimony found that was given during the case found was that they decided that the safest thing to do to ensure a Republican majority was draw the map such that there was a 12-4 split. 12 solidly Republican districts, 4 solidly Democratic districts. And there's testimony that they looked at making the split 13-3. However, if they did a 13-3 split, the 13 seats would not be as solidly solidly Republican. And we have seen since 2011, not one single district in Ohio flip. Not one has flipped since this map was drawn.
Those that are Republican, and those that were designated Democrat are Democrat.
And so the Republican consultants who were paid in excess of $100,000 to engage in this activity did what's called packing and cracking. So they packed all the Democratic voters into districts. Marcia Fudge's district is one, finally ensuring that her district would have Democratic voters in the Akron area in addition to the south and east side of Cleveland. They also created what they emailed and called the Columbus sinkhole, which is just a circle of the Columbus metro area to capture all of the Democratic voters in Columbus. So in those two instances, they packed. They also cracked. Of course, now I cannot think off the top of my head on the district that was cracked, but they took counties and separated counties, and they engaged in behaviors where they diluted the Democratic votes by decreasing their concentration. So election cases are a little bit different. So an election challenge is filed. It goes to a 3-judge panel. In this case, 2 trial court judges and 1 circuit court judge heard the case. They took all of the evidence and they issued the opinion. And that opinion then gets appealed directly to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court has not definitively ruled that partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional, and they have not passed a test. So when Justice Kennedy was on the court, he notoriously refused to adopt a test for how to determine if partisan gerrymandering was happening and if it was unconstitutional. So it's clear you can't gerrymander on the basis of race, but it's unclear as to whether you can for partisan purposes. So a number of cases, both Democratic gerrymanderings and Republican gerrymanderings are making their ways to the United States Supreme Court. But I have another typo. I'm so sorry about the typos in this, guys. What the court found was that they found this 3-judge panel that partisan gerrymandering occurs where the dominant party in government draws district lines such as to entrench itself in power and disadvantage the disfavored party votes. And the court found that invidious partisan intent, the intent to disadvantage Democratic voters and entrench Republican representatives in power, dominated this map drawing process. They found that throughout the process, the Ohio and national map drawers made decisions based on their likely partisan effects. The court pointed out a number of times how these maps were drawn by Ohio consultants with the blessing of Boehner, how national consultants came in. It was done in conjunction. They also noted how the Democratic representatives and legislators were left out of the process. They specifically noted that while numerous Republican legislators had viewed the map prior to its introduction, and they were consulted about the possibility of their district being mapped out of existence, for lack of a better word, no Democrats were consulted. And what the court found was that experts used various metrics and methodologies to measure their findings, but several takeaways were universal. The Ohio map sacrifices respect for traditional districting principles in order to maximize pro-Republican partisan advantage. 2, the Ohio map's pro-Republican partisan bias is extreme, compared both to historical plans across the United States and to other possible configurations that could have been adopted in Ohio. And 3, the Ohio map minimizes responsiveness and competition, rendering one consistent result no matter the particularities of the election cycle. And the court, there are a number of experts that spoke, and because there's no consistent test for determining what constitutes a partisan gerrymander, there were a number of theories and statistical models and theories that these political scientists put forward. But one of them found that the pro-Republican bias was at 20%, and the normal bias to one particular party or the other hovers at around 6 to 8%. And that he's never seen 20% ever, and that you can gerrymander and favor one party or the other, but this 20% swing he's never seen. And so then the court concluded that we are convinced by the evidence that this partisan gerrymander was intentional and effective, and that no legitimate justification accounts for its extremity. And then I said the 2012 map dilutes the votes of Democratic voters by packing and cracking them into districts that are so skewed towards one party that the electoral outcome is predetermined. And so then they made a couple of conclusions. We conclude that the map unconstitutionally burdens associational rights by making it more difficult for voters and certain organizations to advance their aims, be they pro-democratic, that's a large D, or pro-democracy with a small d. There were a number of citizens that testified as to this map and the effects of the map, both those that were in heavily concentrated Democratic enclaves, such that they felt that in their district there would be no ability to effectively mobilize and change the hearts and minds of other people, and those that were cracked and had no ability to effectively campaign for their candidate of choice because what's the use and what's the point, basically creating voter apathy. There was a lot of testimony that people who are really engaged in the process have no idea who even the representative is, because the person living 3 blocks away have a different representative. There was testimony about people that thought they had one representative and then get to the ballot and realize they have a different one. Several several representatives testified. Marcia Fudge testified, and she testified pretty powerfully. The Ohio legislature couldn't get rid of her seat. Her seat is a historically majority minority district, and was a topic of a lot of conversation because they said they had to keep her district majority minority, and so they had to gerrymander it down to Akron to ensure that it was majority minority. The court spent a lot of time talking about how that excuse was just ridiculous, and about how when Lewis Stokes and the late Stephanie Tubbs Jones had that seat, how it was drawn such that it was majority minority and not didn't require the representative to drive all the way down to Akron. Marcia Fudge testified how she didn't learn that her district had been redrawn in such a manner until after the map was released, and that she, it was hard for her because she doesn't live in Akron. That's not her home. Those aren't her constituents. And part of the reason she's a representative is to represent the people that are in her geographic area. Marcy Kaptur likewise testified about being stretched from Toledo through to Cleveland. She testified at length about how she has to, when she gets on 80 and drives all the way through Toledo, she has to drive through 3 other districts to get back into her district.
They call it the snake on the lake.
Yes.
They call that district the snake on the lake because that's what it does. It just follows the shore of the lake.
Yes. And you can't, to get on a normal freeway, she has to, go through so many other districts. And then there are 2 iterations of the map. So the map was released, and then it was everyone had such an outcry about it. So then they redrew the map, but there were no real substantive changes to that map, except they did take one representative's district and put it back together. So they had split a county, and he got his county back. I do want to note, so as you guys may remember, there was a legislative or ballot initiative last year that we should redraw the maps, that the map drawing process should be bipartisan and done in a better manner and in a constitutional manner. However, that ballot initiative does not become law and did not affect the presidential 2020 race. However, this court decision does. It makes the map drawing process have to happen by mid-June, and if it doesn't happen by mid-June, the court said they were going to draw the map for the 2020 presidential election. The Ohio Republicans have filed an appeal and a stay at the trial court level. The trial court denied the stay and said, you better get cracking on that map. They also appealed to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court ordered the ACLU's plaintiffs. The ACLU is not the plaintiff itself; they get the plaintiffs, but they ordered them to respond by next week as to why they should not stay the case. It's going to be a real indication as to what the court, if the court allows the stay to happen or not. It's going to be interesting to get kind of a glimpse as to what they're thinking. And because Maryland, I believe Maryland's a constitutional gerrymander in favor of Democrats, and then there's another state, I don't know which state, that is towards Republicans. So we've got this going both ways. So whether and how the court draws this test is going to be interesting. But we've lived with this map for since 2012, and I'm looking forward to a new map.
We're all looking forward to a new map. All right. There's a lot of stuff going on at the legislature right now. Any questions? Summations, questions?
I personally would really like to, to me, and this is just a hypothesis on my part, being that I'm a BSW, is that to me it seems like women are actually the targets, and they're using us to try to take advantage of everyone else, and then use our children or family as a threat to manipulate us. So I mean, it's from a lady's perspective, I mean, because of the type of lady I am, but I really feel that, and it's really strong, and it's really quite uh what's the word I want to use? It's quite irritating. So, I mean, as far as like being able to, I'm glad, Joan, that you said that we will definitely be taking a part of that. So I might need, when I write a testimony or something or decide to speak, if I am asked to, I would really appreciate somebody else looking at whatever it is I write or decide to testify. So to make sure I don't cross the line, because I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, there's a lot of ridiculousness, and I would always be glad to.
We really need Jesus. I mean, hey, when you don't, I'm a firm believer in someone having the right to do something and someone not having the right to do something. And this is like clearly not working. It's not. Just a minute.
There's an attack on democracy from various points.
It's just really, really, it's just so wrong that I'm really glad that I'm able to communicate with other people about what's going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Ramona.
Oh,
other questions?
This is Lori Albright. I guess my question would be, I appreciate the alerts that come out, and I try to respond to those, but is it just the usual letter writing and contacting representatives? Living up here in Cleveland, I can contact my representatives, but they vote the way I want them to. I'm not sure with the legislature what we can activate to have an impact.
Well, certainly, actually, phone calls and personal letters are used, even though your legislators may agree with you. Those do give them ammunition to work with.
Okay.
We heard that one from Nikki Antonio. She also said that Nikki Antonio, when she did our April 6th event for UU Justice Ohio, she also said that it does help to call the governor's office, and it does help to have others that you know in different districts call their people and write their people. So even if your person agrees with you, there are others that you can get who may be outside of your district to help with that too at the state level. The state folk do also listen when people do show up to the hearings, but that is difficult if you're in Cleveland and the hearing, of course, is in Columbus. But you can do written testimony and send written testimony in. And I'm going to be trying to get more of that information out. Unfortunately, the way the legislature tends to do this is you get like a one-day warning that they're going to be doing a hearing, and the the written testimony has to be in by 9 o'clock the following morning. So
yes.
Yeah,
so I've been keeping the legislative tracker on the UUJO website, and usually it's like Friday afternoon, they'll at least have some of the hearings, and so I try to do a forward looking. You'll see on the legislative tab, it'll say like in the future on May 17th, this is happening or this will happen, and so that might be you can check there for testimony that's coming up. Lori, is there a specific issue you feel like you need to do or want to do more on?
Well, like when the House Bill 33 came up, which is very disturbing. Well, all the stuff is disturbing, but that was very disturbing. And I decided to do snail mail because I understand that is looked at more than email or whatever. And I did not get a response from any of the people. I think I sent a dozen letters to the people who were like on the committee and that kind of stuff. I didn't get one response from anybody. And I didn't know what that meant, like, you know, the mailbox ate my letters, or whether they just don't have a mechanism to respond to snail mail as opposed to automated email responses. I don't know. It just felt weird. I guess the other thing that I wanted to just share, I know it doesn't have anything to do with the legislature, but it has to do with the criminal justice reform stuff up here in Cuyahoga County. I'm part of the Coalition Stopping Inhumanity at the Cuyahoga County Jail.
Oh,
And
excellent.
we are planning a protest at the jail a week from tomorrow on May 23rd at 4 p.m. press release, and then, you know, hanging around for protests and things to acknowledge the year that has passed that the Metro Health staff alerted the administration of Cuyahoga County Council to the conditions at the jail and how little has changed in that year.
We just had the 9th death, which I'm sure you know.
Oh yeah, Friday.
It's just
yeah,
disturbing.
yes. And so, Justine, you were at the pep rally today, then?
I was.
Yeah, so was
yes.
I.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I wish I had known, and I would have said hello. Yes.
Yeah.
My one of my partners sits on the board, and actually one of my good friends does as well. It's a fantastic school.
Yeah, I worked there for 36 years.
Did you really?
Yeah, and
It's a small world.
I've been 8 years out since then, working in the East Cleveland School. So yeah,
we would be happy to get that word out to, you know, our UUJO network.
Oh, good. I will. Yeah, I always forget that, so I can forward that to you, Joe.
Yes, you can, because
and
that's what we do.
The Ohio Collaborating Group has been pushing it, and there's been a lot of activity on Facebook. But yes, I will send that to you.
And then on the critical infrastructure bill, Joan, is there any way for Lori does the Buckeye Environmental Network need any help, or is there anything more we can do with them? I just wonder if.
Yeah, the Ohio Buckeye, or the Buckeye Environmental Network, is how I hear about when, you know, the hearings are going to be in advance, even in advance of what we get from the state.
Yeah.
And they usually help bundle up the written testimonies, and we send them in. What I can do is I'm learning the ropes of how to get the written testimonies in and where to send them, because it does matter where you send them and when you send them.
Yeah.
So that is another thing that I can take on. What I need to do is somehow get a list of the UUJO people that are willing to do that kind of work, so that I don't send it out to everybody in the network, but to the limited folk who are willing to take the time to write that kind of testimony. And then I know I can send it in to the right people because I've already learned how to do that. So that gives me something to work on as to how to do that. But just know that that's something that I can do. I do know how to do that.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Sure, Ramona.
Is anyone surprised that they ruled that last night's death as a suicide?
I can't hear Ramona.
Is anyone surprised that they ruled that last death a suicide at the county jail?
The most recent one?
I think he hanged himself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one, you know, there have been some other, suspicious things that have happened at that jail for sure, and some indictments. I'm following that. The UUJO website isn't formatted the best. I know Joan's working on it hard, and that stuff tends to get buried, but it's there have been indictments at the jail for brutality and for maltreatment of prisoners. This one seems to be, and I think I've been reading about it. I think he had some mental health issues as well.
But
think.
abuse can trigger those mental health issues.
That's true.
And,
but he had been in, Lori, I think he'd only been in the jail several days.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, it's just so interesting just to and Ramona, I want to hear what you want to say, but I want to just buttress some of the things that are going on here. The double speak and the weirdness that goes on. I did a testimony in front of, sorry, it's a police going by on my street. I did testimony in front of the Cuyahoga County Council about the negative effects of solitary confinement on people who have mental health issues, which of course is about at least a third of the jail population. And much to my pleasant surprise, Dale Miller, one of the people on the safety committee which oversees the jail, put on the agenda what the policy of the jail was about solitary confinement. I was like, oh, well, that's cool. So I unfortunately was not able to go to that particular meeting, but another person in the coalition videotaped that portion of it. And so they had the interim jail person up there to talk about it before this committee. And he got up there and said, and with a straight face, we don't do solitary confinement at the jail. We do have disciplinary isolation, but we don't do solitary confinement. And I'm just like, what? How stupid do you think we are? I mean, it was just.
It sounds Orwellian. Like
it is Orwellian.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's infuriating.
Yeah.
I do that a lot. How stupid do they think?
Yeah. Let's use a different term, and maybe people won't understand what we mean.
Oh.
Okay.
It's you know, the one of my first jobs as an attorney was to work on a class action lawsuit that was against the workhouse, which is another word for the county jail, regarding strip searching and publicly delousing all of the inmates at the jail. And halfway through that case, some circuit ruled that was okay, and so that those class actions disappeared. But one of my jobs was to just go through workhouse documents, and it's a demoralizing reality. It's yeah.
I have one more question for you. You know, especially here for us here in Cleveland, there is a video. Joan, did I send it to you where this woman was being beaten right in front of her house, and an officer was beating her, and she was resisting arrest. And what she did was she was already on the ground, and they flung her to the ground. And when she resisted again, the officer shot her point blank, and she wasn't even armed. I do have that video on my phone.
Oh my!
So I sent it to some people through Messenger that I felt would get you know, that would care enough to step forward. But you know, the fact that we're doing this as far as the Cleveland County Jail, I thought it would be something that you guys would want to see.
Resend it. I do not recall seeing that one, Ramona. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is it okay if I send it to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Certainly.
Okay. Because it's very alarming. It's
Lori, Justine, I'll share it with
really
you.
horrible to see a woman already down and he just shoots her and she's not armed.
Where did this happen, Ramona?
This happened in let's see.
Was this Ohio?
Yes, it is. I think it's in Ohio. You know what? I'm not going to say yes, it is.
Okay.
I'm going to send it to you, and because they were saying hurry up and share it before it's removed, because you know they will remove stuff like that. So
we'll
I am
research.
going to send it to you after the call. If you hear echoes, because I'm using the computer and my phone.
Okay.
But yeah, I really think you should see this. Joan, if I send it to you, then you can share it. Is that okay?
Yes, I can, hon. Yeah.
Okay. You really have to see this. I just got it yesterday.
Now, if this is Ohio, then that's something we should know about.
Okay.
Okay. Heaven knows it happens all over the country.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we've hit our 8 o'clock mark, and I do want to thank you, Justine, for a wonderfully thorough update, as you do. And yes, we are working on the website so we can also showcase these wonderful updates that you give us in a way that other people will want to read as well as view. And that's why we record these webinars as well for people that want to see them. And I'm going to close this out with just a very, very short statement from the Interfaith Worker Justice Center that said, "We stand on the side of love with the 99%. We want a society that works for 100%. How we care for one another is a moral question. How we divide the nation's prosperity is an ethical question. How we witness to injustice is our faith question. So let us do our part in creating a vision for a more just America." Thank you all.
Amen. Thank you.
Joan, that was a fantastic way to end it. Thank you,
Yeah,
as
thank
always.